It is now July and I'm officially back in Rwby mode. And I have good reason to be, with Before the Dawn releasing, the Volume 7 soundtrack coming out, and the amazing Rwby panel. Before we know it, Volume 8 will be airing, and I can remember why I love the show so much. I'm gonna be honest, Season 7 Episode 12 kind of traumatized me. So much so that I've not really wanted to make a Rwby video for a long time. I still love the show a lot, but I wish I could ignore some of that episode, if you know what I mean. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. For today's Rwby video, I want to discuss some of the most important information we learned in the novel Before the Dawn. This is the follow-up novel to After the Fall, which told the story of what happened to Team Coffee after the events of Rwby Volume 3. Before the Dawn has a much bigger task on its hands, as we find that Team Sun, as well as a whole bunch of other teams from Beacon, have joined Coffee at Shade Academy. And while I do have some thoughts on the novel as a whole, I will save all that for the very end of the video, as I don't really plan on making another video on this book like I did with the previous one. Now, on to our boys from Team Sun. I'm sorry to break the news to anyone who has yet to read the book or hear other spoilers, but we learned basically nothing about Scarlet and absolutely nothing about Sage. Which is disappointing, but I will save all the rest of my opinions for later. So for this video, I'm just going to share the interesting information we learned about Sun, Neptune, and the tiny interesting thing we got for Scarlet. Starting with the best monkey boy, Sun Wukong, we get a good amount of information on his backstory. We meet his cousin, Star Sanzang. She's the only family he has left as Sun's parents died due to a grim attack. Now she runs a dojo in Shade, where Sun lived for a few years, presumably before going to Haven. The most intriguing thing we learned about Sun was how he unlocked his semblance. To use his semblance, he always starts off with an image that lets him focus. This is the image of a desert willow, which he once saw as a child while looking for a place to live with his clan in Vacuo. Going to sleep one night, he spotted the willow, which gave him peace and a sense of purpose. He was going to tell Star about the tree as a perfect place to live, but it had vanished. By having something that he alone remembers so vividly that gave him strength, he was able to discover his semblance, via Sun. That's honestly quite beautiful, and honestly now that I think about it, I hope we get a story about Team Rwby unlocking each of their semblances. These are long overdue if you ask me. Now on to Neptune, who I think has the more surprising backstory. It turns out he grew up on the coast of Argus, with his parents and siblings. Even though his family all have water-related semblances, himself included, he always had an aversion to water, and due to this aversion, he never learned how to use his semblance. In an attempt to get Neptune to learn how to control the water around him, his brother Jupiter figured a trial by water would work best. As any good older brother would do, Jupiter dragged him to the beach and threw him off a pier when he was only 4 years old. Swimming is second nature for the Vasilius family, and while Neptune was fine and was able to make it back to shore, a lot was learned about his semblance in the process. Not only could he push water away from his body, but he could also pull it to him, and even manipulate water's cohesion with other things. So, when he made it back onto land, he brought some of the ocean water with him, and was caught in a bubble of water that was continually increasing its size. The water stuck to his eyes, and went into his ears so he couldn't see or hear. Not to mention the lack of being able to breathe, since the water went into his lungs. As he panicked, he quickly sent the water away from himself, which then went around his brother. This thankfully did not scare Jupiter for long, as his semblance is to be able to turn water into vapor. But now, Neptune was more afraid of water than ever, as he thought he had almost killed Jupiter. And so Neptune would never swim again, nor did he even want to touch water in case it got stuck to him. The only way to even get Neptune outside was for his parents to buy him goggles and eventually move farther inland. At Haven Academy, Neptune learned more about his semblance, which he named Water Attraction. To manipulate water, he first needs to touch it and bring him to himself to charge the molecules. Then he's able to control it over a distance or propel himself at great speeds in the water. But in the present, we never actually see him use his semblance, as he does not think it is worth the trouble and would only ever use it as a last resort. With the introduction of Neptune's semblances, and mentioning that everyone in his family has water-related semblances, it does reveal that other semblances besides the Shinny family one can be connected on a genetic level. Perhaps this mostly only happens when both parents have similar semblances, as we know Crow and Raven have very different semblances, as do the twins introduced in this book. Of course, Neptune and his siblings do have all unique semblances, but for there to be a common theme amongst a family is something totally new to Rwby lore. And finally, we got Scarlet. Sorry for going out of order, but I didn't even notice we learned Scarlet's semblance until after doing the initial recording. And his semblance, gliding, isn't given big fanfare like most of the other semblances of the important characters. In fact, it's only ever mentioned twice, and very quickly, but he uses it to safely reach the ground or onto another object. Nothing too fancy here, but it's pretty fitting considering his illusion is Peter Pan without straight up giving him the power of flight. And I think that about covers the new information we get about Team Sun, besides learning how Scarlet and Sage react to Sun leaving them without warning and just as suddenly returning. which is not well. So now I'm just going to give a few of my thoughts about this novel. Sadly, I was not a big fan of this book. Don't get me wrong, I really wanted to love it, just as I love After the Fall. But what made After the Fall so great was the amount of information we learned about Team Coffee, as well as how Team Coffee's time at Beacon intertwined with Team Rwby's, and just the flashbacks to the fall of Beacon and before in general. Before the Dawn had almost none of that. We don't really learn much about Team Sun when they were at Haven, nor did we learn a single interesting fact, as far as I can recall, about Scarlet and Sage. And this was a huge missed opportunity, as I kind of expected to learn a lot, since After the Fall relied so heavily on Team Coffee's backstories and semblances. Especially with Scarlet, this was kind of a letdown that almost nothing happened with him. There did seem to be a potential friendship for him to have with Nolan, but it went nowhere. A lot of fans felt betrayed after Clover's death due to his relationship with Crow, and while that was for the most part just fan theory feeling the eventual fallout, Scarlet is word of God confirmed to be gay. This was the perfect opportunity to showcase that, and yet there was nothing. I felt that this was very strange compared to what we got for Coco in the previous book, but perhaps the author did the best he could now that there are so many different characters to juggle around. But I should acknowledge how far in advance books can be written, so it's possible the novel was already done before the last few episodes of Volume 7 came out. Though I will say, at least Scarlet got chapters in his perspective. Sage didn't even get that luxury. Now the one redeeming hope I have for this book is that it's not the last in the series. While this book did very much feel like an end to the story, with the crown taken care of, I wouldn't mind more. If Book 3 has to focus on Team Sun and their adventures, then we'll have another chance to explore Scarlet and Sage and who they are as huntsmen as well as people. Additionally, giving us Neptune's traumatic semblance discovery and to mention of it later in the book, but never actually have him use it, is either bad writing or there are plans to use it in the next book. I'm really hoping for the latter, as this is a semblance we definitely need to see in action. And I gotta wonder if he has 6 more siblings that all have names of planets. Also, I would like to know more about Sun's cousin Star, and more about Team Sun's backstory in general. Finally, I would like to mention I did enjoy the reveal about who was behind the crown, the twins Jax and Jill Asturias, and their motives. It took me longer than it should have to realize they were supposed to be based off of Jack and Jill. Though I'm a bit sad that their tragic backstory, where Jillian is pretty much responsible for the death of her mother immediately after being born, since she took her aura due to her semblance, probably means that my Crow headcanon won't be canon. I had long thought that perhaps Crow got his name and semblance because he was always told he was a bad like charm, as it went all the way back to his mother dying almost immediately after Crow was born, even though it was not his fault. But who knows, it's still a possibility, I would say. However, with the introduction of both Neptune's and Jillian's semblances, as well as showing that Yatu's semblance can break people out of mind control and bring memories back, and the pretty clear quote from Glinda in this novel that says, "Semblances can grow as people do," I still want to believe that Crow will one day gain mastery over his semblance. Even if he never gets good luck, as that was Clover's role to fill. I do want Crow's semblance to evolve in some shape so it doesn't actively harm him. Of course, as with all tie-in material, the more these novels do that the writers of the show need to know about, the more likely that we'll get retcons, which Rwby is already famous for. Learning about Headmaster Theodore and Professor Rumpole was awesome, but now there is no denying that these books will have an impact on the plot. So I hope the show takes all this into account when Team Rwby does get to Vacuole. And that was pretty much it. I'm sure I'll do more Rwby content in the future, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and consider supporting the channel on Patreon. It would mean a lot. Have an animated day.